The maid was kicked out of the mansion after revealing her pregnancy, but the millionaire regretted it when he discovered her sacrifices. The echo of Zara Mitchell's heels rang through the marble corridors of the Richardson mansion as she hurried up the stairs, clutching a white envelope in trembling hands. Her heart was pounding, not just from the climb, but from the weight of the news she was carrying. The mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, imposing as ever, seemed even more intimidating that October morning. "Mrs. Richardson?" Zara called out, her voice betraying the nervousness she felt. The matriarch of the family, Victoria Richardson, was in her private office, as she always was on Thursday mornings. The room, decorated with dark mahogany furniture and portraits of generations of Richardsons, emanated power and tradition. Victoria looked up from her desk, her gold-framed glasses reflecting the light coming in through the French windows. "Yes, sir. I thought we'd already discussed all the arrangements for the charity dinner." As the Richardson family's personal secretary for 2 years, Zara knew every nuance of that house, every protocol, every expectation. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. "Actually, Mrs. Richardson, I need to discuss something personal." Zara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "About David and me." Victoria's face instantly hardened. She removed her glasses with deliberate slowness, placing them on the mahogany table. "Go on." "I'm pregnant," Zara said, her voice low but firm. 12 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria Richardson stood up slowly, her icy blue eyes fixed on Zara. "You planned this, didn't you? A pregnancy to force a marriage with my son?" "No, Mrs. Richardson, after all we've done for you, we gave you a job, confidence, access to our family." Victoria's voice grew in intensity. "And you repay us by seducing my son?" David Richardson chose exactly this moment to enter the office, his normally calm face transformed by concern. "Mom, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, David." Victoria cut him off with an abrupt gesture. "This girl has obviously manipulated the situation." Zara felt tears burn her eyes. "Mrs. Richardson, I love your son. I never loved Victoria enough humidity. The Richardsons have built an empire in Newport over generations. I won't allow an opportunist to destroy all that." David moved to stand next to Zara, but his mother held up her hand, stopping him. "You have 5 minutes to leave this house, Miss Mitchell. Your employment is terminated, and if you attempt any kind of blackmail, our lawyers will contact you." "Mom, please." David tried to intervene, but Victoria remained unyielding. "As for you, David, we have the charity ball tonight. The Preston family will be there, including your daughter Caroline. I suggest you start thinking about your future, the proper future for a Richardson." Zara didn't wait to hear more. With dignity, even heartbreak, she turned and left the office. Her hands unconsciously rested on her belly as she walked down the stairs for the last time. David caught up with her in the foyer. "Zara, wait. Don't go like that." She turned around, the tears now flowing freely. "You belong here, David. It always has been." "No, my place is with you." "With you." He tried to hold her hand, but Zara pulled back. "Your mother is right about one thing. The Richardsons are an institution in Newport. I can't be responsible for destroying that." "But what about us? What about our baby?" Zara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. "I need to go away for a while, to think. Please don't look for me." Before David could protest, she was out the front door, leaving behind not only the Richardson mansion, but also her dreams of a future with the man she loved. In the weeks that followed, David plunged into a mechanical routine of corporate meetings and social events. Always haunted by Zara's absence, he discovered, through discreet investigations, that she had moved to Providence, but respected her request not to look for her. Victoria Richardson, satisfied with the apparent end of the problem, stepped up her efforts to bring David closer to Caroline Preston, heiress to one of Rhode Island's most traditional families. However, every forced smile at social events, every superficial conversation with Caroline, only increased the emptiness in his chest. It was over lunch with his best friend, Marcus Cooper, that David finally verbalized his true feelings. "I can't go on living like this, Marcus. Every minute away from her, away from my son. It's like I'm betraying who I really am. Marcus watched his friend for a moment before replying. You know, sometimes I wonder if this whole Richardson tradition isn't more of a prison than a legacy. Marcus' words echoed in David's mind for days. As he watched the sun set over Newport Bay from his penthouse in the city center, a resolution began to form in his heart. The Richardsons' fortune, social prestige, expectations, all weighed far less in the balance when compared to the love he felt for Zara and their unborn child. The question now was, would he have the courage to choose his own path, even if it meant abandoning everything he had ever known? 3 months have passed since Zara left the Richardson mansion. Providence, with its historic streets and colonial architecture, offered a modest refuge compared to the opulence of Newport. In her small apartment in the Fox Point neighborhood, she carefully organized her finances, balancing prenatal medical bills with basic necessities. You need to tell him, Zara, insisted her friend Lauren Bennett, a nurse at Women and Infants Hospital, where Zara had her prenatal care. David has a right to know about the complications. Zara stroked her already visible belly, remembering her last appointment. The discovery that she was expecting twins and the concerns about her blood pressure made the pregnancy high risk. I can't, Lauren. You don't know Victoria Richardson. She would destroy any chance of David keeping his position in the family business. What about your job at the museum? You can't keep hiding your pregnancy for long, Lauren argued, worried about the friend she had met during one of her first consultations. The director already knows. She was understanding, but Zara hesitated. The administrative assistant's salary barely covers the rent. What Zara didn't reveal was that she had sold practically all her jewelry, including the delicate sapphire ring David had given her on their first anniversary together, to cover medical expenses. Each item sold carried precious memories, but the well-being of their babies came first. Meanwhile, in Newport, David was facing his own battle. His mother's attempts to orchestrate a relationship with Caroline Preston had intensified, culminating in a formal dinner that evening at the Richardson mansion. David, dear, Caroline commented on that art gallery in Boston. Victoria mentioned over dinner, her apparently casual tone masking her true intentions. Perhaps you could accompany her for the weekend? David moved his fork across his plate, barely touching the elaborate food prepared by the family chef. I have an important meeting in Providence on Friday, he lied, knowing he needed an excuse to continue his discreet search for Zara. Caroline, an elegant woman with blonde hair and impeccable manners, smiled gently. Maybe next week then? The exhibition will be on for a month. It was Marcus who later that evening brought the news that would change everything. In his office in downtown Newport, he handed David a brown envelope. I found her, David. Marcus hesitated before continuing. But there's more. She's working at the Rhode Island Museum of Art, living in a tiny apartment, and, he paused significantly, selling her belongings to pay for medical appointments. David felt his heart squeeze. Doctor's appointments? Is she ill? High-risk pregnancy? Twins? Marcus watched his friend's face turn pale. She's been hiding it from you to protect her position in the company. Apparently, her mother has connections on the board of the hospital where Zara initially had her prenatal care. She had to change hospitals to prevent the information from reaching you. The revelation hit David like a punch in the gut. While he was stuck at social dinners and endless meetings, Zara was facing not only a risky pregnancy, but also financial difficulties on her own. How can I have been so blind? David ran his hands over his face, guilt consuming him. She's carrying my children, Marcus. Children. And here I am, worrying about the damn inheritance. What are you going to do now? David stood up, a new determination in his gaze. First, I'm going to transfer a significant sum to an account in her name. Then he picked up the phone. I'm going to call Benjamin Walsh, the lawyer. I need to make sure that my share in the company is protected before I confront my mother. I won't allow her to use the family's financial power to harm Zara or our children. While David began to mobilize his resources, Zara faced another day of work at the museum. The extensive collection of 19th-century American art, which normally fascinated her, now seemed a constant reminder of the social differences that separated her from David. During her lunch break, sitting on a bench in the museum's garden, she received a notification from the bank on her cell phone. When she checked it, Her eyes widened at the substantial amount that had been deposited in her account. Minutes later, her phone rang. David's name flashed up on the screen. With trembling hands, Zara answered. "How did you find me?" "Does it matter, Zara? Why didn't you tell me about the twins? About the complications?" His voice, the voice that filled her dreams every night, was full of concern and something else, determination. "I couldn't risk your future, David. Your mother. My future is with you and our children," he interrupted her. "And as for the money, don't you dare refuse. It's the least I can do after 3 months of cowardice." Silent tears streamed down Zara's face. "It wasn't cowardice. I asked you not to look for me, and I was an idiot to respect that request. But that's enough now." David's voice took on a tone of urgency. "Meet me tonight, in Roger Williams Park, near the Botanical Gardens. At 7. Please, Zara. We need to talk." The request hung between them, laden with unspoken promises and renewed hopes. Zara knew that this meeting could change everything, for better or worse. The question was she ready to risk her heart again? Roger Williams Park was particularly quiet that fall evening, with only a few visitors strolling along the illuminated paths. Zara arrived a few minutes before 7, her brown coat protectively enveloping her almost 5-month-old belly. The reflection of the Botanical Gardens lights danced over the nearby lake, creating an almost magical atmosphere. David was already there, leaning on one of the pillars at the entrance to the garden. When he saw her, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and concern. In seconds, he crossed the distance between them, stopping a few steps away from Zara, respecting the space she seemed to need. He began, his voice breaking as he noticed her pronounced belly under her coat. "My God, Zara, are there really 2 of you?" She nodded, unconsciously placing her hands on her belly. "2 girls, actually. I found out at the last ultrasound." David closed his eyes for a moment, visibly moved. When he reopened them, Zara could see the determination in them. "We need to talk. There's a cafe nearby, more private." "David, the money you deposited, it's not about money," he interrupted her gently. "Please give me an hour of your time. That's all I ask." The cafe was a cozy establishment on Park Avenue, with private booths and soft lighting. After settling in and placing their orders, chamomile tea for Zara and strong coffee for David, the awkward silence was finally broken. "Marcus told me about the pregnancy complications," David began, his hands restlessly on the table. "Why didn't you come to me?" Would have what?" Zara questioned softly. "Abandoned everything? Your name, your heritage, your family?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "And that's exactly what I intend to do now." Zara felt her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" David leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I've spent the last 3 days with Benjamin Walsh, my lawyer. We're getting everything ready for me to quit the family business." "No," Zara exclaimed, louder than she had intended. Lowering her voice, she continued, "You can't do that. Richardson Enterprises is your legacy, your future." "No, Fada. My future is you and our daughters." He paused as the waitress brought their drinks, waiting for her to walk away before continuing. "Did you know that I sold my apartment in Newport? And then I transferred all my personal shares to a separate account?" Zara stared at him, stunned. "David, I have more than enough for us to start a new life, away from Newport and my mother's manipulations. I bought a house in Boston, in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a small but charming garden, 10 minutes from the best hospital in the city." Tears began to form in Zara's eyes. "You can't sacrifice everything for me. Your mother would never forgive." "Maybe not," David agreed, reaching across the table to touch hers. "But she would never forgive me if I continued living a lie, denying my feelings and abandoning my daughters." "What about your job?" A confident smile appeared on David's lips. "Do you remember Peter Morrison, my colleague at Yale? He has a financial consultancy in Boston, specializing in sustainable investments. He offered me a director's position months ago, but I always turn it down because of the family's expectations. I accepted the offer this morning." Zara felt the world spin around her. It was a lot to process. The sudden change, the decisions already made, the future that seemed to be laid out before her. I know it's a lot to take in, David continued, squeezing her hand lightly. But I need you to understand something. I'm not just doing this for you or the babies. I'm doing it for me too. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path. Your mother will try to stop you, Zara warned, knowing full well Victoria Richardson's power and influence. I've already thought of that. David took a sip of his coffee before continuing. Benjamin has prepared all the necessary documentation. Once I sign the papers tomorrow, not even my mother will be able to reverse the situation. My share in the company will be sold to a group of investors from San Francisco. The waitress came back to ask if they wanted anything to eat. Zara ordered an apple pie, giving in to the sudden desire for something sweet. David smiled as he noticed. It was these little moments that he had missed over the last few months. Do babies move around a lot? He asked softly when they were alone again. Zara couldn't help but smile. All the time, especially at night. The doctor says it's normal in twin pregnancies. May I? David asked, indicating her belly. With a nod, Zara guided his hand to the point where one of the babies was most active. David's face lit up as he felt the gentle movement under her fingers. I know I asked you not to come to me, Zara said after a moment. But the truth is, I've missed you every day. Then don't push me away again, David replied, his voice charged with emotion. Let me be there. Let me be the father our daughters deserve and the man you need. The pie arrived, and as Zara savored each bite, they began to discuss practical details. The house in Boston would be ready in 2 weeks. David's new job would start at the beginning of next month. There was an excellent hospital just a few blocks away, and the schools in the area were known for their quality. What about your job at the museum? David asked. Honestly, I love art, but the salary barely covers my expenses. With the complications of pregnancy, come with me to Boston, David interrupted her gently. The Museum of Fine Arts is always looking for assistant curators. With your experience, the rest of the evening passed in a mixture of plans, memories, and promises for the future. When they finally left the cafe, the full moon was shining over Providence, silently witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. On the way back to her apartment, Zara realized that, for the first time in months, she felt real hope. David's decisions weren't just romantic gestures. They were concrete actions, planned with care and determination. Maybe, just maybe, they could really build something new away from the shadow of the Richardsons. What neither of them knew was that very night, Victoria Richardson would receive a phone call that would drastically change her plans to maintain control over her son's life. Victoria Richardson watched the screen of her laptop with icy eyes as she read the email sent by her contact at the bank. David's financial movements over the last 72 hours confirmed her worst fears. The sale of the apartment in Newport, the massive transfer of shares, the purchase of a property in Boston. So that's how it's going to be, she muttered to herself, closing her laptop hard enough to make the china cups on her desk shake. The next morning, David arrived at the Richardson Enterprises office earlier than usual. Before he could reach his office, his secretary intercepted him with a worried expression. Mr. Richardson, your mother has called an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock. David checked his watch. 8:15. Enough time to make a crucial call. Locking himself in his office, he dialed Benjamin Walsh's number. Is everything ready? He asked as soon as the lawyer picked up. The documents are ready, but Benjamin hesitated. I got an interesting call last night. The San Francisco investor group is backing out. What do you mean backing out? The deal was practically done. Apparently, they've received some guidance about possible future legal complications. Benjamin's voice carried an implicit meaning that David understood immediately. My mother, in Providence. Zara was finishing setting up her desk at the museum when she received a text message from Lauren. We need to talk. It's urgent. They met in the hospital cafeteria during Lauren's break. The nurse looked agitated as she stirred her coffee without drinking it. What is it, Lauren? You're scaring me. I had a visitor last night. Victoria Richardson cursive. Lauren finally looked up. She knows everything, Zara. About the pregnancy complications, about Boston. Zara's blood ran cold. How? She has contacts everywhere. But that's not all. Lauren lowered her voice. She mentioned something about lawsuits for breach of medical confidentiality against any healthcare professional who sees you in Boston. In the Richardson Enterprises boardroom, the tension was palpable. Victoria occupied the head of the table, emanating an authority that made the other board members seem like mere extras. "Gentlemen," she began, "I've called this meeting to discuss a serious threat to the stability of our company." David, sitting on the other side of the table, remained impassive while his mother outlined a series of concerns about his judgment and commitment to the company. "Therefore," Victoria concluded, "I propose a vote to re-evaluate David's position as COO." "That won't be necessary," David interrupted, standing up, "because I'm resigning." A buzz went through the room. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "You can't just I can and I will." David pulled an envelope from his jacket. "My letter of resignation, effective immediately. As for my actions, I've already instructed my lawyers on their disposition." To that group in San Francisco, Victoria's Maid City, "I'm afraid they're no longer interested." "No," David replied, surprising her. "For the Hamilton Foundation for Historic Preservation." Victoria's smile disappeared. The Hamilton Foundation was one of the few organizations in Newport that she couldn't influence, known for its unwavering integrity. Meanwhile, Zara was facing her own dilemma. Lauren's words echoed in her mind as she drove home. Victoria Richardson was willing to use her influence to hinder her access to medical care in Boston. With a high-risk pregnancy, she couldn't afford to take any chances. Her phone rang. It was David. "It's done," he said as soon as she picked up. "Evet ist. The shares will be transferred to the Hamilton Foundation by Monday." "David," Zara took a deep breath. "Your mother was in hospital." "I know. Benjamin told me about the threats." His voice was full of determination. "But I've thought about that too. Do you remember Dr. Rachel Morrison, your second cousin?" "Exactly. She has a private practice in Cambridge, completely independent of the big hospitals. I've already spoken to her, and she's willing to take on your prenatal care." Zara stopped at the red light, feeling the baby's move. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Almost everything. There's just one thing missing." David paused. "Marry me, Zara. Not because of the babies, not because of my mother, but because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you. Face any storm by your side." The signal opened, but Zara stood still, tears streaming down her face. A car honked behind her, bringing her back to reality. "Yes," she whispered, putting the car in motion. "Yes, I'll marry you." The next day, when Victoria Richardson received the official notification of the transfer of shares to the Hamilton Foundation, she also found an envelope containing a wedding invitation on her desk. The ceremony was to take place in 2 weeks' time, in a small chapel in Cambridge. The Richardson matriarch stared at the invitation for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time in decades, Victoria Richardson was facing something her power and influence could not control: her son's determination to choose his own path. And as the sun set over Newport, casting golden shadows over the Richardson mansion, a new story began to unfold. Not one of power and tradition, but one of love, courage, and new beginnings. The news of David and Zara's impending marriage spread quickly through Newport's social circles. Victoria Richardson watched her influence slip through her fingers as congratulatory messages poured in for her son, including from family she considered unquestioning allies. In her office at the mansion, she held an old photograph. David at the age of 6, wearing a small suit during his first charity event. Next to it, a folder contained detailed reports about Zara: her modest childhood in Connecticut, her scholarship in art history at Brown, the job she got on her own merits before joining the Richardsons. Mrs. Richardson, Margaret, her housekeeper for 3 decades, interrupted her thoughts. "Mr. Harrison Blackwell is here." Harrison Blackwell, chairman of the board of Newport Hospital and a close friend of the family for generations, entered the office with his usual imposing bearing. Today, however, there was something different about his expression. "Victoria, we need to discuss this situation with David. If you've come to defend my son, I came as a friend," Harrison interrupted her gently. "What are you doing, trying to prevent this girl's medical access in Boston?" "That's not you, Victoria. You don't know me as well as you think, Harrison. I know you well enough to know that Richard would never approve of that. The mention of her late husband made Victoria stiffen. Don't you dare use Richard against me. He adored David. More than that, he respected his son's choices. Harrison approached the desk. And that girl, Zara. Have you asked why David chose her? Meanwhile, in Cambridge, Zara faced her first appointment with Dr. Rachel Morrison. The office, decorated in soft shades of blue and green, conveyed a sense of calm that contrasted with her anxiety. Your previous tests show that we need to monitor your blood pressure carefully, Rachel explained, reviewing the documents. But I don't see any reason to panic. Many pregnant women with twins face similar challenges. David, sitting next to Zara, held her hand as they watched the ultrasound monitor. The two little silhouettes danced across the screen, a scene that still moved him deeply. They look healthy, Rachel smiled. Have you thought of names? Grace and Hope, Zara replied softly. David chose. After the appointment, as they walked through the garden of Mount Auburn Cemetery near the clinic, David noticed that Zara was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? Your cousin is amazing, she began, choosing her words, but I can't help worrying about the future. What if your mother? Hey, David interrupted her, stopping to stare at her. Nothing my mother does can separate us now. The house is ready. My new job starts next week, and in a few days we'll officially be a family. Back in Newport, Victoria had an unexpected visitor. Caroline Preston, the young woman she had been looking forward to seeing as her daughter-in-law, arrived unannounced. I've come to say goodbye, Mrs. Richardson, Caroline announced, surprising Victoria. I'm moving to Paris. I've accepted a position in the European branch of my family's company. But I thought you and David... Mrs. Richardson, Caroline interrupted her gently. I always knew that David didn't love me. In fact, I admire his courage in choosing true love over social expectations. Caroline's words echoed in Victoria's mind long after her departure. That night, alone in her room, she opened an old jewelry box. Inside, she found a delicate sapphire brooch, the first gift Richard had given her, long before they became the powerful Richardsons of Newport. The next morning, David arrived at his new office at Morrison Financial to find a small box on his desk. Inside, his mother's sapphire brooch, accompanied by a simple note. To Zara, your grandmother wore it on her wedding day, as I did on mine. The gesture, though small, carried significant weight. David knew well the history of that brooch and what it represented to his mother. When he showed the jewel to Zara that evening in their new home on Beacon Hill, she immediately understood the significance. Do you think she's starting to accept it? Zara asked, gently touching the sapphires. Knowing my mother, it's more than acceptance. It's a request for a truce. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The small chapel in Cambridge was to be decorated with white and blue hydrangeas, a choice Rachel helped to make. Lauren, now officially godmother, was helping Zara with the final adjustments to her dress, specially designed to accommodate her pregnancy in an elegant way. The day before the ceremony, Victoria Richardson did something that surprised everyone. She called Zara. I don't intend to make a big speech, she said, her voice retaining some of its usual formality. But I want you to know that the brooch is not just a piece of jewelry. It's a promise that your daughters will have a grandmother present in their lives. If you allow it. Zara felt the babies move, as if responding to their grandmother's voice. They'll love meeting you, Mrs. Richardson. Victoria, the matriarch corrected softly. I think it's about time you call me Victoria. The morning of the wedding dawned with a soft mist covering Cambridge, typical of early fall in Massachusetts. In the small historic chapel of St. James, arrangements of white and blue hydrangeas created an ethereal path to the altar, while the light filtering through the century-old stained glass windows painted colorful patterns on the marble floor. Zara, in her preparation room, watched her reflection in the mirror as Lauren adjusted the last details of her dress. The ivory silk dress, with a delicate drape that elegantly hugged her belly, had been designed especially for her by a local designer. The brooch matched perfectly, Lauren commented, adjusting the sapphire jewel that now adorned the neckline of the dress. Who knew Victoria Richardson could take such a significant step? Before Zara could reply, A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Rachel Morrison, David's cousin, entered with a warm smile. "I've come to do a final check on the bride," she announced, her medical instincts ever present. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous, emotional, and the twins won't stop moving," Zara replied, placing her hand on her belly. "I think they know it's a special day." On the other side of the chapel, David was adjusting his tie for the third time when Marcus entered the room. "Your father would be proud," Marcus commented, handing David an aged envelope. "Your mother asked me to give you this before the ceremony." With slightly trembling hands, David opened the envelope to find a letter written by his father, dated just a few weeks before his sudden death 5 years ago. "My son, if you're reading this, it means you've found someone who makes your heart sing like your mother did, and still does mine. True love, David, is not measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the way your heart recognizes its place next to someone. Your mother may seem tough, but she learned to be that way to protect our family. Give her time. True love has the power to melt even the thickest ice. Love, Dad." David folded the letter carefully, feeling a lump in his throat. Just then, a new knock on the door announced his mother's arrival. Victoria Richardson entered, impeccable in a navy blue ensemble. But there was something different about her posture, a softness that David hadn't seen for years. "Your father wrote that letter the day he told me he was ill," she revealed, her voice betraying a rare emotion. "He always knew you'd find your own way." "Mom, no, let me finish." Victoria moved closer, adjusting the lapel of her son's suit with precise gestures. "I spent so much time trying to protect the Richardson legacy that I almost destroyed the most important part of it, you." In the bride's room, Zara received an unexpected visitor. Caroline Preston, elegant in a pink dress, had arrived straight from the airport. "My flight to Paris isn't until tomorrow," she explained with a genuine smile. "I couldn't leave without seeing David finally follow his heart." The ceremony began promptly at 2 in the afternoon. The small chapel was filled not only with the 60 people invited, but with an atmosphere of hope and reconciliation that seemed to hang in the air like the morning mist itself. When the doors opened and Zara began her walk down the aisle, David felt his heart stop for a moment. She was radiant, her sapphire brooch catching the light from the stained glass windows, her smile illuminating the whole room. Victoria, sitting in the front row, couldn't hold back a tear when she saw the family brooch adorning the bride. Next to her, Harrison Blackwell discreetly offered a handkerchief. Reverend James, a gray-haired man who had known the chapel for decades, conducted the ceremony with a perfect blend of solemnity and affection. When it came time for the vows, the silence in the chapel was absolute. "Zara," David began, his voice firm despite his emotion, "you taught me that true love is not just about happy moments, but about courageous choices and mutual sacrifices. I promise to be by your side every step of the way, to protect our family with all my might, and to love you and our daughters until my last breath." With tears in her eyes, Zara replied, "David, you have shown me that love can overcome any obstacle when it is true. I promise to be your partner at all times, to raise our daughters with the values we share, and to love you with the same intensity that made me believe in second chances." When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, the sound of the chapel bells mingled with the applause of the guests. Victoria was the first to hug the couple after the ceremony, whispering a welcome to the family in Zara's ear that made the bride cry again. The reception, held in the garden of the historic Charles Hotel, was an intimate but elegant celebration. The tables decorated with the same hydrangeas as the chapel created a cozy atmosphere under the lights hanging between the century-old trees. During dinner, Marcus, as best man, stood up for his speech. "I've known David since our days at Yale, and I've never seen him as complete as when he's with Zara. This wedding is not just the union of two people, but proof that true love can transform hearts and break down walls that seemed insurmountable." As night fell over Cambridge, David and Zara shared their first dance as husband and wife. The twins, as if they could feel the music, moved gently on Zara's belly. "They're going to be dancers," David joked, his hand resting on his wife's belly. "We're just fussy like their father," Zara replied with a smile. Victoria watched the couple dance, remembering her own wedding to Richard. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to relearn how to see the world through the lens of love, as her husband had always done. Adjusting to life in Boston brought challenges and discoveries for the newlywed couple. Their new home on Beacon Hill, with its cobbled streets and red brick facades, offered a historic charm that contrasted pleasantly with the modernity of the house's renovated interior. One Thursday morning, Zara was organizing the twins' room when she felt a sharp pain. Instinctively, she put her hand to her belly, now 6 months pregnant. David, who was in a video conference in the office downstairs, noticed something was wrong through the baby monitor that had been installed in every room. "Peter, I need to reschedule this meeting," he interrupted the call, climbing the stairs every 2 steps. He found Zara sitting in the breastfeeding chair, breathing deeply. "It's just discomfort," she tried to reassure him, but her pale face showed something more serious. "I'll call Rachel." David was already holding the phone when the doorbell rang. To both their surprise, Victoria Richardson was standing on the threshold, an expression of genuine concern on her usually impassive face. "The pressure monitor I installed on your cell phone has triggered an alert," she explained, entering without waiting for an invitation. "You're monitoring my blood pressure?" Zara asked, surprised and touched. "Technology developed by the medical division of Richardson Enterprises," Victoria replied, already checking Zara's vital signs with equipment she had brought in her bag. "Still in the testing phase, but I thought you'd be a perfect candidate." David watched the scene with mixed emotions. His mother, always so controlling, was using her power and influence no longer to separate, but to protect her family. Rachel arrived 15 minutes later, finding the situation under control. "High blood pressure, but not alarming," she diagnosed. "However, we need to increase the rest. Remote work from now on." Zara, Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, where Zara had recently started as assistant curator, was sympathetic to the situation. Her boss, Dr. Marcus Sullivan, even suggested that she coordinate the next American art exhibition directly from home. "Technology allows that today," he argued during a video call. "And frankly, your perspective on colonial New England art is too refreshing to miss." Victoria, who had decided to spend a few days in Boston just in case, turned the guest office into a command center. Between calls to Newport and video conferences with executives, she discreetly monitored her daughter-in-law and helped with preparations for her granddaughter's arrival. "These cribs are beautiful," commented Zara one afternoon, looking at the handmade furniture Victoria had ordered from a cabinet maker in Vermont. "But they must have cost a fortune." "My granddaughters deserve the best," Victoria replied simply, adjusting the crystal mobile that caught the light of the setting sun. "Besides, they were made with wood from a century-old oak tree on the Richardson estate in Newport. I thought it was appropriate." David, balancing his new position at Morrison Financial with family responsibilities, found in Peter Morrison more than an understanding boss, a true mentor. "You know," Peter commented over lunch, "when you turned down my previous offers, I always felt it was the influence of Newport speaking louder than your own desires." "And you were right," David admitted, stirring his salad. "But now, for the first time, I feel like I'm building something truly my own." The firm specializing in sustainable investments was growing, and David's innovative ideas for connecting traditional investors with clean energy projects were attracting positive attention from the market. At home, evenings were filled with preparations for the babies and conversations about the future. Zara, even when confined to rest, coordinated the decoration of the rooms and organized the next museum exhibition online. "I thought of something interesting," she commented one evening as David massaged her swollen feet. "What if we combine colonial art with contemporary perspectives on identity and belonging?" Speaking from experience, David smiled, knowing well his wife's journey from outsider to member of the Richardson family. "Maybe," she smiled back, "but it's fascinating how certain struggles and transformations are repeated through the generations." Victoria, who was passing through the room at that moment, stopped to listen. The transformation in her own life, from an inflexible guardian of the Richardson tradition to an eager and present grandmother, was living proof of this truth. "The girls will be lucky to have you as their mother," she commented, surprising the couple with her presence. "Someone who understands so well the value of change and preservation." The moment was interrupted by a sudden movement in Zara's belly. "I think they agree," she laughed, guiding Victoria's hand to feel her granddaughter's. The Richardson matriarch, who had always maintained a formal posture in all situations, allowed herself a moment of pure emotion as she felt the baby's movements. Her normally calculating eyes softened in a way that David hadn't seen since his own childhood. "Grace and Hope," Victoria murmured. "Perfect names for two little girls who are already bringing our family together in ways I never imagined possible." That evening, after Victoria had retired to her room, David found Zara standing in front of the twins' bedroom window, watching the lights of Boston. "A penny for your thoughts," he whispered, hugging her from behind. "I was thinking about how life takes turns," she replied, leaning back against him. "A few months ago, I was alone in Providence, selling jewelry to pay for doctor's appointments. Now you have a whole family supporting you," David added, his hands resting protectively on his wife's belly, "including a mother-in-law who has installed pressure monitors on your cell phone." Zara's laughter echoed softly through the room, mingling with the gentle tinkling of the crystal mobile. It was a sound of peace, of promise, of the future, a future that neither of them could have imagined on that turbulent afternoon in Victoria's office in Newport. Winter was approaching Boston with unusual urgency that year. On a particularly hectic November afternoon, Zara was resting on the living room sofa, coordinating the last details of the Museum of Fine Arts exhibition on her laptop, when she felt the twins moving differently than usual. "You're especially restless today," she murmured, adjusting her position. At almost 7 months pregnant, every movement required a calculated effort. The pressure monitor on her cell phone emitted a soft alert. Before she could reach it, Victoria, who was working at the dining table, was already at her side. 200%, Zara smiled, referring to her mother-in-law's dedication. "I'm fine. I just need some water." "Let me get it for you," Victoria insisted, but was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of David, who usually didn't get home from work until 6. "Peter canceled the afternoon meetings," he explained, noticing the questioning looks. "There's a storm approaching, and he preferred everyone to go home early." As if to confirm his words, a distant clap of thunder reverberated through the house. Victoria immediately started checking the windows, making sure everything was properly closed. "Rachel called," David continued, taking a seat next to Zara. "She wants us to pay a visit to the clinic tomorrow, just in case. Apparently, her last pressure was a bit high." "You two need to stop monitoring my every breath," Zara protested, but with no real annoyance. Deep down, the constant worry made her feel protected. The storm arrived in full force as night fell. Victoria, who had planned to return to Newport the following day, decided to extend her stay. "I can't leave you alone in this weather," she declared, already organizing dinner with her characteristic efficiency. During dinner, as the rain pelted the windows, David shared news about his work at Morrison Financial. "We've managed to close a partnership with a solar energy startup in San Diego," he announced, visibly proud. "It's exactly the kind of project I've always wanted to develop at Richardson Enterprises, but I've never had the autonomy to do so." Victoria stopped her fork in midair, a shadow of guilt crossing her face. "Maybe I've been too controlling with the company's management." "Maybe," David arched an eyebrow, but his tone was more playful than accusatory. "Well, I'm learning to let go of the reins," Victoria admitted, surprising everyone with her frankness. "Actually, I've been thinking about some changes at Richardson Enterprises." Before she could elaborate, the lights flickered on and off, leaving the house in total darkness. "Don't move," David ordered, already activating the flashlight on his cell phone. "I'll check the generator." "Since when do we have a generator?" Zara asked, surprised. "Since your mother-in-law decided that her granddaughters couldn't go without heating or monitoring," Victoria replied, already lighting candles strategically placed around the house. The generator kicked in minutes later, restoring power to the essential systems. The storm outside seemed to mirror the changes taking place within the family. Intense, unpredictable, but also purifying. Speaking of changes, Zara began, taking advantage of the moment of family intimacy. "I received an interesting email today from Dr. Sullivan." "From the museum?" David asked, returning to the table. "Yes. He wants me to lead a new project to digitize the collection, something I can do predominantly from home, even after the babies are born. Victoria surprised everyone again. That reminds me, I need to show you something. She turned to her work folder and pulled out a series of documents. These are the papers to set up a Richardson Educational Foundation. The idea is to fund projects that combine art and technology, especially in underprivileged communities. David and Zara exchanged surprised glances. This was not the Victoria Richardson they had met months ago. And I would like, she continued, her voice betraying a rare vulnerability, for you, Zara, to consider taking over the running of the foundation when you feel ready. The silence that followed was broken only by the roar of the storm and the soft sound of the generator. Zara felt tears forming in her eyes, not just at the offer itself, but at what it represented: complete and unrestricted acceptance into the Richardson family. I don't know what to say, Zara finally managed to articulate. Tell him you'll think about it, Victoria replied softly. There's no hurry. For now, your only concern should be bringing my granddaughters safely into the world. As if responding to their grandmother, the twins moved energetically, making Zara laugh through her tears. I think they're already looking forward to meeting this new version of Grandma, David joked, placing his hand on his wife's belly. The evening progressed with the three of them sharing stories and plans for the future, while the storm gradually lost its strength outside. Victoria told of her own fears when she was pregnant with David, of how Richard had helped her get through every anxious moment. Your father always said that the Richardsons are like oak trees, she recalled with a nostalgic smile. Strong and sturdy, yes, but also able to bend in the wind without breaking. The fetal monitor emitted its rhythmic and constant sound in Dr. Rachel Morrison's examination room, while Zara tried to decipher the expression on the doctor's face. The previous night's storm had left Boston with a fresh, washed air, but the tension in the office was palpable. His heart rate is a little fast, Rachel commented, adjusting the equipment. And your blood pressure is still higher than I'd like. David, sitting next to the gurney, squeezed Zara's hand lightly. Victoria, who had insisted on following the consultation, remained silent in the corner of the room, but her attentive eyes didn't miss a single detail. What does that mean exactly? Zara asked, trying to keep her voice calm. It means we're going to need to bring the birth forward, Rachel replied, straight to the point. Not immediately, but I want you admitted for constant monitoring from next week. 32 weeks is an important milestone for twins. The news hit the room like a bombshell. David felt Zara squeeze his hand tighter, while Victoria stepped forward with her cell phone in hand. I'll make the necessary arrangements, the Richardson matriarch declared. Rachel, which hospital do you recommend? Massachusetts General has one of the best neonatal ICUs in the country, Rachel began, but was interrupted by Zara. The museum exhibit, she muttered, more to herself than to the others. I've already sorted that out, Victoria surprised everyone again. I talked to Dr. Sullivan this morning. He suggested turning the exhibition into an interactive virtual event. In fact, he found the idea even more interesting than the traditional format. David watched his mother with a mixture of admiration and amazement. In just a few months, she had transformed from an antagonistic force into a staunch ally, using her influence and resources no longer to control, but to protect and support. On the way out of the office, while they were waiting for the elevator, Zara suddenly felt dizzy. David quickly supported her, and Victoria was already calling Rachel back when Zara assured them that she was fine. Just stand up slowly and take deep breaths, Rachel advised after a quick examination. And no stairs today. Use the elevator for everything. Back at the house on Beacon Hill, they found Lauren waiting at the door, carrying several bags. I've come to prepare everything for the hospitalization, she announced, entering without ceremony. And I've brought that ginger tea you love, Zara. The next few hours were filled with preparations. Lauren and Victoria worked in surprising harmony, organizing clothes, documents, and essential items for the hospital stay. David, alternating between work calls and helping with the preparations, felt a growing anxiety that he tried to mask for Zara. I found this among your father's things, Victoria commented softly, handing David a small package during a moment of calm. Inside was a pair of little white knitted baby shoes. They were yours, she continued, her voice laden with emotion. Richard kept them all these years. I thought maybe, for one of the girls. David hugged his mother, a rare gesture between them in recent years. Thank you, Mom, for everything. In the master bedroom, Zara was organizing some books she intended to take to the hospital when she found her own wedding invitation just a few months earlier. The words Grace and Hope Richardson had been added by hand to the back in a handwriting she recognized as Victoria's. She started planning the christening, she said. She started planning the christening before they were even born, Lauren commented, noticing what Zara was observing. I've never seen Victoria Richardson so human. In the evening, after Lauren had left and Victoria had retired to the guest room, David found Zara on the glazed balcony, watching the city lights. What are you thinking about? He asked, wrapping his arms around her. About how unpredictable life is, she replied, leaning back against him. A year ago, I was just the Richardsons' secretary, in love with the boss's son. Now I'm here, married, expecting twins, with their mother practically living with us and planning a foundation. So not for a second, she smiled, guiding his hand to where one of the babies was moving. It just sometimes seems surreal. Welcome to the Richardson family, he joked, but there was truth in his words. Nothing is small or simple with us. A movement at the door caught his eye. Victoria was there, holding a cup of tea. Sorry to interrupt, she said softly, but I thought I should show you this. She held out her tablet, displaying the Museum of Fine Arts website. On the screen, the announcement of the new virtual exhibition Transformations. Art and Identity in Colonial America shown prominently, with Zara Mitchell Richardson's name as lead curator. They want to launch it as soon as the babies are born, Victoria explained. Dr. Sullivan said it will be the museum's first fully immersive exhibition. Zara felt tears escape her eyes, not just at the professional accomplishment, but at the way her name now officially carried the mark of her new family. Not as a burden, but as an honor. Now, both of you off to bed, Victoria ordered, regaining her usual tone. Tomorrow we have a lot to organize before the hospitalization. As they prepared for bed, David and Zara could hear Victoria on the phone in the hallway, coordinating details with the hospital. Her voice, once so intimidating, now sounded like a soothing lullaby. Massachusetts General Hospital, with its wide, busy corridors, became Zara's new temporary home. The private room in the high-risk pregnancy ward, overlooking the Charles River, had been meticulously prepared by Victoria, who had insisted on bringing a few items from home to make the environment more welcoming. The original curtains were awful, she commented as she adjusted the soft fabric panels she had had installed. And this sofa bed is much more suitable for David than that uncomfortable armchair. Zara watched her mother-in-law with a mixture of amusement and gratitude. Victoria Richardson's transformation from overbearing matriarch to devoted grandmother still surprised her every day. David divided his time between remote work, which he insisted on doing from the hospital, and caring for Zara. Peter Morrison had been more than understanding, rearranging the meetings into a virtual format whenever possible. The San Diego project can wait, he assured during a video call. Family comes first. On the morning of the third day of hospitalization, Rachel arrived with worrying news. The protein levels in my urine have increased, she explained, showing the test results. It's a sign of preeclampsia developing. What can we do? David asked, his hand clasping Zara's protectively. For now, intensive monitoring. But we need to be prepared. The babies may need to be born earlier than we planned. Victoria, who was present during the consultation, immediately started making calls. In less than an hour, she had organized an appointment with the best premature birth specialist on the East Coast. Dr. Harrison Chin will be here tomorrow, she announced. He works mostly at Johns Hopkins, but he agreed to come as a personal courtesy. Mom, you didn't have to, David began, but Victoria interrupted him. Yes, I did. These are my granddaughters, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that they come into the world safely. Lauren, who had swapped her shifts to be more present, brought encouraging news from the museum. Dr. Sullivan sent this, she said, handing Zara a tablet. On the screen, the preview of the virtual exhibition showed an innovative interface that allowed visitors to walk through digital galleries. It's amazing, Zara whispered, browsing through the exhibition. They've managed to capture exactly the atmosphere I imagined. The days turned into a routine of constant monitoring, doctor's visits, and small victories. Each day that the twins remained in the womb was celebrated as an achievement. Victoria practically moved into the hospital, turning a small waiting room nearby into her makeshift office. Richardson Enterprises won't fall apart if I work remotely for a few weeks, she declared when David suggested she should rest at home. One evening, while David had gone to get coffee, Zara found Victoria alone, watching the city from her bedroom window. You know, Victoria began without turning around. When Richard died, I thought my only mission was to preserve his legacy through David. I was so focused on keeping everything under control that I almost destroyed the only thing that really mattered, my son's happiness. Victoria, no, let me finish. She finally turned around, her eyes shining with restrained tears. Not only did you bring love into David's life, but you also taught me that family is much more than tradition and expectations. It's about accepting change, growing together. The moment was interrupted by David's return and Rachel's arrival for another evening checkup. The twins' heartbeats remained strong and regular, little warriors fighting for a few more days of development. 33 weeks, Rachel smiled, making a note in her chart. Every day is a victory. That night, after everyone had retired, David and Zara lay awake, talking quietly about their fears and hopes. The lights of Boston twinkled on the other side of the window, like earthly stars guarding their dreams. Grace and hope, David murmured, his hands resting on Zara's belly, are little miracles. Who are determined to make a dramatic entrance into the world. Zara joked, but her voice betrayed a hint of concern. Well, there, Richard sent. David smiled. We never do anything by halves. The sound of heart monitors broke the stillness of the early morning at Massachusetts General Hospital. Zara woke up startled, feeling a sharp pain she hadn't experienced before. David, who was sleeping on the sofa bed next to her, was already up before she could even call out to him. Something's wrong, she whispered, her hands clutching the sheets. The blood pressure monitor began to emit insistent alerts. In a matter of minutes, Rachel and her team burst into the room. Victoria, who apparently never left the hospital, emerged soon after, still wearing the same elegant ensemble as the day before. BP 160/110, a nurse announced. Signs of fetal distress and baby yay. We need to do a C-section now, Rachel decided, her voice calm but firm. Zara, I know we wanted to wait a few more days, but the girls are telling us it's time. David held Zara's hand, trying to mask his own fear. I'm here, love. You three are stronger than you think. While the team prepared Zara for surgery, Victoria made quick phone calls. Dr. Chun is on his way to the airport, she reported. He'll be here in 2 hours. We don't have 2 hours, Rachel replied, checking the monitors. The pressure keeps rising and baby A is showing worrying decelerations. The operating room was already prepared when they arrived. The efficiency of the team contrasted with the emotional chaos everyone felt. Lauren, who was on duty that night, got special permission to attend the surgery. 33 weeks and 4 days, Rachel commented as she prepared. It's not ideal, but we've had success with much smaller babies. The epidural anesthesia was administered, and a blue curtain was raised, separating Zara from the view of the procedure. David, dressed in surgical clothing, stood next to her, whispering words of encouragement. Initial incision, Rachel announced. The next few minutes seemed like an eternity. Then, at 3:47 a.m., a high-pitched, determined cry filled the room. Grace is here, Rachel exclaimed. Tiny but a fighter. 2 minutes later, her sister Hope joined the world. Her cry a little softer, but just as determined. 1 kilo and 700 grams each, someone announced. Apgar 7 and 8. The babies were quickly taken for assessment, with the neonatal team already prepared. David was torn between watching his daughters and comforting Zara, who was crying silently. They're perfect, he whispered, kissing her forehead. Small, but perfect. Outside the operating room, Victoria waited anxiously with Marcus, who had arrived as soon as he received the news. When David came out to break the news, he found his mother on her knees, praying, something he hadn't seen her do since his father's death. "They're in the neonatal ICU," he said, his voice breaking. "They're so small, Mom, but the doctors are optimistic." Victoria stood up, hugging her son with surprising strength. "Richardson are fighters," she murmured. "Your daughters would be no different." The next few hours were a blur of emotions and medical information. Dr. Chen arrived in time to assess the twins and confirm that, despite their size, they had good vitality. 33 weeks is an important milestone, he explained to the Gather family. The main challenge now is lung development, but modern technology offers us excellent resources. Zara was transferred to a recovery room, where she was finally able to see her daughters through photos and videos that David had taken. The little ones were in separate incubators connected to various monitors, but their tiny faces were already showing distinct features. "Grace has her nose," she commented sleepily, tapping the screen of her cell phone. "In Hope, she has the Richardson eyebrows." Victoria, watching the scene from the doorway, felt her heart squeeze. These little warriors were the next generation of her family, but they represented something much bigger than just the Richardson name. They were living proof that love can overcome any obstacle. "I have something for you," she said, approaching with a small velvet box. Inside were 2 tiny sapphire pendants. "They were mine, given to me by my grandmother. Now they belong to my granddaughters." David recognized the jewels. His mother wore them at every important family event. The gesture symbolized not only acceptance, but a true passing on of legacy. "When they're older," Victoria continued, her voice soft, "I'll tell the story of how their sapphires represent not only tradition, but also renewal and unconditional love." Lauren entered the room with news from the neonatal ICU. "Grace started breathing on her own for a few minutes," she reported with a smile, and Hope squeezed the nurse's finger with surprising strength. "My little fighters," Zara murmured, tiredness finally overcoming anxiety. As she fell asleep, David and Victoria remained in the room, united by a bond stronger than blood or tradition. Love for these 3 women who had transformed their lives in unimaginable ways. Outside, Boston was dawning under a fine drizzle, as if the sky itself were discreetly celebrating the arrival of the Richardson twins. In the neonatal ICU, Grace and Hope continued their journey, protected by modern technology and wrapped in the love of a family that had finally learned the true meaning of legacy. The neonatal ICU at Massachusetts General Hospital became a sanctuary of hope in the 2 weeks following the twins' birth. David and Zara developed a meticulous routine, taking turns between visits to the babies and the moments of rest necessary for Zara's recovery. Grace, the first to be born, showed surprising strength. She was already breathing unassisted for longer and longer periods and had begun to gain weight steadily. Hope, although a little more delicate, made up for her initial fragility with a quiet determination that impressed even the most experienced doctors. "They're like day and night," commented Dr. Chun during one of his morning assessments. "Grace is all energy and movement, while Hope watches everything with those watchful eyes." Victoria, who rarely left the hospital, had turned one of the family rooms into a veritable command center. Between video conferences with Richardson Enterprises and coordinating with the medical team, she found time to knit tiny cardigans for her granddaughters. "I never imagined I'd see her knitting," David commented one afternoon, finding his mother concentrating on a delicate pattern in pink wool. "Your grandmother taught me when she was pregnant with you," she replied without looking up from her work. "She said that each stitch carries a blessing for the baby. At the time, I thought it was sentimental nonsense, but now," her voice faltered slightly. The Museum of Fine Arts virtual exhibition was about to be launched, and Dr. Sullivan was keen to keep Zara involved in the final decisions, even if only remotely. The project had morphed into something bigger than originally planned, incorporating interactive elements that allowed visitors to explore the connections between colonial art and contemporary family histories. "It's almost poetic," Zara reflected during a video call with museum staff. "How stories of transformation and adaptation remain relevant through the centuries." One afternoon, while Zara was resting in her hospital room, David found Lauren in the cafeteria, looking worried about something. "What is it?" he asked, sitting down with his coffee. "I've received an interesting proposal from Boston Children's Hospital," she began hesitantly. They're setting up a team specializing in neonatal care for families in vulnerable situations. They want me to lead the project. That's incredible, Lauren, David exclaimed, but noticed that she still looked uneasy. Yes, but she paused. Part of the funding would come from a new foundation, the Richardson Foundation for Education and Health. David almost choked on his coffee. My mother, she came to me last week, Lauren confirmed. She said she was inspired by the care I've been giving to the twins and other families here in the ICU. The news took David by surprise. His mother, who had always seen philanthropy only as a social obligation, was genuinely getting involved in projects that made a real difference to people's lives. When they told Zara the news, she smiled with tears in her eyes. Your daughters are already changing the world, even from inside incubators. The moment was interrupted by Rachel's agitated arrival. Grace is ready for her first kangaroo. The kangaroo method, where babies are placed in skin-to-skin contact with their parents, was an important milestone in the development of premature babies. Zara, still recovering from her cesarean section, was carefully assisted by the team to the neonatal ICU. With delicate movements, the nurse transferred Grace from the incubator to Zara's chest. The little girl, who weighed less than 2 kilos, immediately snuggled up, her tiny heart beating in tune with her mother's. Hi, my love, Zara said. Hi, my love, Zara whispered, tears streaming silently down her face. Mommy's here. David photographed the moment with trembling hands, while Victoria watched from the doorway, discreetly wiping her own eyes. 2 days later, it was Hope's turn to try the kangaroo method, this time with David. The baby, who was usually quieter than her sister, surprised everyone by firmly grasping her father's finger. I think we found the real heiress of the business, Victoria joked, observing the determination on Hope's tiny face. The weeks became a blur of small victories and precious moments. Every gram gained, every minute breathing on their own, every new reflex was celebrated as a monumental achievement. Peter Morrison, who had become a frequent visitor, brought encouraging news during one of his visits. The solar energy project in San Diego is growing beyond expectations. And do you know who has shown an interest in investing? Richardson Enterprises. David looked surprised at his mother, who just shrugged. Portfolio diversification is a sensible strategy, she commented with a small smile. In the evenings, after the visitors had left and the hospital had quietened down, David and Zara would spend hours by the incubators, reading stories to the girls or simply talking about the future. Can you believe that in a few weeks we'll be able to take them home? Zara whispered, watching Grace and Hope sleep peacefully. Our family is finally complete, David replied, hugging her from behind. All 4 generations under one roof. Victoria, who was passing through the corridor at the moment, stopped to watch the scene through the glass. The empire she had worked so hard to protect seemed insignificant compared to the miracle she was witnessing there. The miracle of unconditional love and renewal through the generations. A month after the twins' birth, the house on Beacon Hill was finally getting ready to welcome its newest residents. Grace and Hope, now weighing just over 2 kilos each, had overcome the major challenges of prematurity and were ready to leave the hospital. The room is perfect, Victoria declared, adjusting the crystal mobiles over the handmade cribs for the 10th time. The decor in soft shades of aqua green and lavender created a serene atmosphere that contrasted with the hustle and bustle of the preparations. Mom, you need to rest, David insisted, watching his mother reorganize the drawers with tiny clothes for the 3rd time. The girls won't be here until tomorrow. Rest, Victoria arched an eyebrow. Your grandmother spent 3 days tidying your room when you were bored. It's tradition. The Richardson mansion in Newport had been put up for sale, a decision that surprised local society. Victoria had chosen an elegant apartment in the same neighborhood as David and Zara, just 5 minutes away. Newport will always be special, she explained during a family dinner. But my place is near my granddaughters now. The Richardson Foundation for Education and Health was already up and running, with Lauren leading the pilot project at Boston Children's Hospital. The program had attracted national attention, with other institutions showing interest in replicating the model. It's amazing how everything has changed in less than a year, Zara commented as she packed up the last of her things in a hospital. Her gaze wandered to the neonatal ICU, where she had spent so many anxious and hopeful hours. Dr. Chen made one last assessment of the twins before they were discharged. "They are true warriors," he smiled, signing the final documents. "But keep up the weekly appointments with Rachel for at least another 2 months." The drive home was filled with restrained emotion. David drove with exaggerated caution, while Zara divided herself between the 2 car seats in the back seat. Victoria followed close behind in her own car, chatting on the Bluetooth with the team who were finalizing the last details in the house. The night nurses arrived, she informed them as they parked, and the pediatrician will make a house call early tomorrow morning. The house had been adapted to receive the babies with every possible comfort. A sophisticated monitoring system had been installed, allowing the parents to follow the girls from any room. "Richardson technology in the service of love," joked Marcus, who showed up to welcome them with a huge arrangement of flowers. The first few hours at home were a careful dance of adaptation. Grace, always more agitated, protested at every diaper change with a determined cry. Hope, on the other hand, watched everything with her big blue eyes, identical to those of her father. "They already have such distinct personalities," commented Lauren, who had made a point of being present on the first day. "Grace will keep you in constant motion." The night brought new challenges. Despite the experienced nurse, David and Zara could barely sleep, checking on the girls at every little noise. Victoria, who had insisted on staying to help with the transition, was found at 3 in the morning nuzzling Hope on the balcony while humming an old lullaby. "My mother used to sing it to me," she explained softly when she noticed Zara watching. "Some traditions are worth keeping." Dawn brought with it the official launch of the Museum of Fine Arts virtual exhibition. Dr. Sullivan had programmed an online ceremony that allowed Zara to participate from home, with the twin sleeping peacefully on her lap during the presentation. "Art, like life, is constantly changing," she said during her virtual speech. "This exhibition celebrates not only our colonial history, but also our capacity for adaptation and renewal." Peter Morrison, who was watching the presentation from his office, sent an enthusiastic message. "We need to talk about expanding the solar energy project to include cultural funding." Victoria has already shown interest. The afternoon brought an exciting surprise. Rachel arrived with the results of the twins' latest tests. "Completely normal development," she announced with a smile. "They've exceeded all expectations." The news was celebrated with a small impromptu dinner in the kitchen, where Victoria surprised everyone by revealing a hidden talent for Italian cooking. "Richard loved my risotto," she commented, serving up generous plates. Some skills lie dormant for too long. As the family gathered around the table, with the twins asleep in a nearby double stroller, David observed how his life had completely changed. The pressure of being the Richardson heir, the suffocating expectations, had all been replaced by something much more valuable: true, unconditional love. "Sometimes I wonder what your father would say about all this," Victoria commented softly, as if reading her son's thoughts. "He'd be proud," Zara replied before David could. "Proud to see how his family has grown, not just in numbers, but in love." The moment was interrupted by a soft cry. Grace had woken up and was demanding immediate attention. Soon Hope woke up too, as if sensing her sister's absence. "Showtime," David smiled, getting up to tend his daughters. Night fell over Boston, enveloping the house on Beacon Hill in a blanket of serenity. In the library transformed into a temporary office, Victoria was finalizing the last details of the foundation while looking out the window at the city lights. In her bedroom, Zara breastfed Hope while David nursed Grace, humming off-key the same song he had heard his mother sing earlier. The domestic scene, so different from the formality that had always characterized the Richardsons, was living proof that true legacy is not in names or fortunes, but in the bonds of love we build. 6 months had passed since Grace and Hope arrived at the house on Beacon Hill, completely transforming the Richardson family dynamic. One spring morning, as the sun painted golden shadows through the French windows, Zara watched her daughters playing on the living room carpet, amazed at how much they had grown. Grace, the ever-adventurous one, tried to crawl towards the scattered toys, while Hope watched her sister with curious eyes, calculating every move before trying to imitate her. The twins' distinct personalities continued to amaze everyone around them. "They're just like you and your father were," Victoria commented, entering the room with 2 cups of tea. Over the last few months, she had become a constant and welcome presence, perfectly balancing her role as a devoted grandmother with her responsibilities at the Richardson Foundation. "What do you mean?" David asked, raising his eyes from the documents he was reviewing. "Grace has Richard's impetuous energy, always ready for the next adventure. And Hope," Victoria smiled, observing her quieter granddaughter. "She has her contemplative way of assessing everything before acting." The neonatal care program, led by Lauren at Boston Children's Hospital, had become a national model. The Richardson Foundation was already expanding the project to 3 other states, with ambitious plans to go national. "I never imagined that our experience in the neonatal ICU would result in something so significant," Zara reflected, remembering the days of anxiety and hope in the hospital. The Museum of Fine Arts virtual exhibition had been a resounding success, attracting digital visitors from all over the world. Dr. Sullivan had already invited Zara to curate a new exhibition, this time exploring the intersections between contemporary art and family traditions. "Speaking of traditions," David began, putting his papers aside. "Peter called earlier today. The solar energy project in San Diego is ready for expansion, and he wants me to lead the new phase of development." Victoria, who now divided her time between Richardson Enterprises and the Foundation, nodded approvingly. "The company is evolving in ways that your father always dreamed of, but I was too stubborn to allow." The sound of Zara's cell phone interrupted the conversation. It was Rachel, calling to confirm the twins' christening party next weekend. The small chapel where David and Zara had been married would be the setting for yet another family celebration. "Lauren, just send me pictures of the dresses." Zara showed Victoria the screen. "The same shades of blue as the sapphires you gave them." The family jewels, now kept in a special box in the girls' bedroom, symbolized more than tradition. They were a tangible reminder of the transformation that had taken place in the Richardson family. The afternoon brought Marcus and Peter for an informal meeting about the future of the business. On the back porch, while the twins took their afternoon nap, the men discussed merging the traditional values of Richardson Enterprises with the sustainable innovations of Morrison Financial. "It's amazing how it all came together," Marcus commented, watching David with pride. "You found a way to honor your family's legacy while building something entirely new." Victoria, who was listening to the conversation while knitting another set for her granddaughters, surprised everyone with a statement. "Actually, I'm thinking of retiring from the presidency of Richardson Enterprises next year." "Mom," David almost knocked over his coffee cup. "Don't look so surprised, dear. The company is in excellent hands with the new board, and the foundation needs more attention to grow as we plan." She paused, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "Besides, I want to have time to teach my granddaughters all the family stories, the real ones, not just the ones that appear in the newspapers." Hope's soft crying interrupted the moment. Before anyone could move, Grace also began to whimper, as she always did when she felt her sister getting restless. "I'll go," Victoria offered, getting up with surprising agility. "I've got a new lullaby to teach them." Watching his mother disappear into the house, David felt a lump in his throat. Her transformation, from a strict and controlling matriarch to a loving and present grandmother, was perhaps the greatest miracle her daughters had worked. In the evening, after everyone had left and the twins had finally fallen asleep, David found Zara in the library, organizing photographs in a special album. "What's this?" he asked, taking a seat next to her. "A project for the girls," she explained, showing him the carefully assembled pages. "The story of our family, not just the Richardsons, but all of us. How we met, the challenges we faced, and how love changed everything." David wrapped his arms around her, looking at a recent photo of Victoria holding the twins. Her face lit up with a genuine smile. Next to it, an old photograph showed Richard Richardson in his office in Newport, young and full of dreams. "You know what's funny?" Zara continued, leaning back in her husband's embrace. "When your mother threw me out of the mansion that day, I thought I was losing everything. But actually, that was just the beginning of our real story. The beginning of our own legacy, David added, gently kissing her temple. Through the nursery monitor, they could hear their daughter's soft breathing, a constant reminder that the true meaning of family goes far beyond names, traditions, or fortunes. It's about love, growth, and the courage to choose your own path. Outside, Boston continued its nocturnal rhythm, its lights twinkling like earthly stars. In the house on Beacon Hill, the Richardsons, all of them, had finally found their true home, not in marble walls or old portraits, but in the unbreakable bonds of love that united them.